Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Famous and Gravy early and ad-free now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
There's some incredible TV coming out of the UK right now. Brits just do it differently. The accents, the wit, the scenery, the devastating one-liners disguised as compliments. It's all streaming on BritBox. They have the best mysteries, dramas, comedies, and seriously addicting originals like Outrageous, based on the true story of the Mitford sisters. They were kind of like the Kardashians of the 1930s, wealthy, audacious, chaotic, wildly opinionated, and always making headlines. And chances are you've never heard their story. It's stunning. It's jaw-dropping. It's very British. So check out Outrageous. It could be your next favorite. Don't miss Outrageous, streaming now only on BritBox.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Famous and Gravy listeners, Michael Osborne here. I've got two things to say before we start today's episode. First, we could really use your help growing the show, and there's a very simple thing you can do. Leave a review for Famous and Gravy on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple, you just scroll down on our show page, tap the stars, and write a few words. These reviews help feed Apple's algorithm and help new listeners to find our show. The second thing is, if you yourself are interested in starting your own podcast and you want to learn about how we built Famous and Gravy, we would love to have a conversation. Our email, as always, is hello@famousandgravy.com. So, two things. Please write a review, and if you're fantasizing about your own show, please reach out. That's it. Thanks again. Let's get to it.
This is Famous and Gravy, biographies from a different point of view. To participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. Now here's the quiz to reveal today's dead celebrity.
This person died 2005, age 67. At his peak, he reached out in his writing to a generation made cynical by the Vietnam War and Watergate, and that was prepared to respond to his visceral honesty.
Wow, okay, so sounds like a writer.
No idea.
Not Norman Mailer.
Not Norman Mailer. Good guess. All right. His early work presaged some of the fundamental changes that rocked journalism today. His approach mirrors the style of modern-day bloggers and social commentators who blend news, opinion, and personal experience on internet postings.
Okay, sounds like a journalist. I don't know that I know a lot of these. And that one's throwing me off, too.
All I can think of is Woodward or Bernstein.
Neither Woodward nor Bernstein. I think they're actually both still with us as of this recording. Yeah. Okay. In a 2003 interview with the Associated Press, he said, "Fiction is based on reality unless you're a fairy tale artist. You have to get your knowledge of life from somewhere. You have to know the material you're writing about before you alter it."
And I'm a reader. I mean, this is a writer, so obviously I should know who this is, and I feel like I don't.
No idea in terms of who is alive or dead. Like, I would say Salinger?
Not J.D. Salinger, but good guess. In 1970, he ran for sheriff in Pitkin County, Colorado. It seemed a joke and another outlandish act until the votes were counted and he came close to winning.
Oh, wow, that has totally thrown me off.
I don't know. I have no idea.
No idea.
Okay. His 1972 book cemented him as a singular presence in American journalism. The book was called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Oh, of course. Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter Thompson.
Hunter S. Thompson?
Today's dead celebrity is Hunter S. Thompson.
reading back through all the things, or not all the things, but an awful lot of the things that you've written, and then a lot of things that have been written about you. Whether sometimes you weren't a little bit like the CIA agents, that you lived your cover.
I'll give you that one, yeah.
Yeah?
Not all the time. But
Not all the time, but
I have to.
You get a lot of fun out of it, don't you?
Oh, if I didn't, I wouldn't do it.
Welcome to Famous and Gravy. I'm Michael Osborne.
And I'm Devin Fromm.
And on this show, we choose a famous figure who died in the 21st century, and we take a totally different approach to their biography. What didn't we know? What could we not see clearly? And what does a celebrity's life story teach us about ourselves? Today, Hunter S. Thompson died 2005, age 67. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by my dear friend, Devin Fromm, who is an associate professor at Occidental College. Devin and I go way back. And I have a question for you. Do you remember when you first read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
I remember when it came on my radar. I'd heard buzz about it, like people because in school, people in those days got hip to Hunter Thompson really early and loved him as an image of youthful
debauchery and...
Yeah, and just acting out, really, for lack of a better word. And he was, I guess I could say, he was a character in my life before I'd read any of his work.
That alone says something.
Yeah, and then I was, in the summer after my junior year of high school, I was sort of doing the thing, and I was bumming around out west, hitchhiking. And I had mentioned to someone I was traveling with at one time, that like in reference to this kind of lifestyle, Hunter Thompson, and he had said, "Ooh, no, that's the joke version of it." And so then I already had that as a counterpoint to the character before I started actually reading his work on my own.
I mean, I guess that's kind of why I asked the question, because I feel like for a certain kind of person, he is a central text at a certain phase of life, somewhere around high school or college.
Yeah, someone our age or older.
Yeah, but also someone our age prone to a certain amount of mischief or trouble, or altered states for that matter, right? Like, he is introduced as a romanticized character, and that book is usually the entry point, which is why I asked the question.
His seminal line, "Buy the ticket, take the ride," speaks very loudly to anyone of a certain disposition in youth.
Well, and I mean, the thing I'm really excited to talk about with you, since you're a lot of things, but among other things, a literary...
Dashing, charismatic. Go on, let's move into that for a minute.
I was gonna say a reader, somebody who reads a lot and is a scholar. I mean, I think the question
I did do my research for this episode.
I can tell. People can't see it, but you've got 5 Hunter S. Thompson books.
Yeah.
Well, I think the kind of question that I'm interested to get into is he important? And I think that there's a question of, is he the romanticized figure important, which is separate from, is his work important, which I am very glad to have you to help me sort through that question. I think that is the ambition of this episode. So,
yeah, thanks. I will say before I get into that, it's funny that to anyone who might know me or what I do, you inviting me on this podcast made a lot more sense when you said it was about Umberto Eco.
Yeah.
I will make up for it by shooting myself out of a cannon at the end of the podcast.
Thanks for playing ball. One last thing before we get started. I do think this episode needs a trigger warning, because there's some pretty heavy stuff around him. So if you're with kids or not available to go into deep, dark territory, then maybe this isn't the episode for you. Let's get right into it. Category 1, grading the first line of their obituary. Hunter S. Thompson, the anger-driven, drug-fueled writer for Rolling Stone magazine, whose obscenity-laced prose broke down the wall between reader and writer, writer and subject, shot and killed himself on Sunday at his home in Woody Creek, Colorado. He was 67. They never do this, where they say he shot and killed himself. Every other time there's a death of despair, it is almost usually glossed over, like they'll just say died at his home. They usually don't call it out like this. This is a shockingly violent way to end the first line of the obituary. And it's kind of the first thing I want to start with, because I read into it in keeping with Hunter S. Thompson as a violent, in-your-face figure.
It's funny, it completely blew past me. I guess because I knew the story. And as you say, it's so on brand for him, it's almost caricature.
Right.
And so for anyone who doesn't know, one of the most famous images of Hunter Thompson of all time is him standing over his typewriter in his front yard firing up 45 into it. And so the idea that he chose that ending for himself, I just skimmed past it. It doesn't...
Yeah, I mean, he talked about suicide for most of his adult life, and he is a gun nut. This is, in some ways, the least surprising conclusion to his life. But it is still, like, to read it this way, shot and killed himself, is like, wow. But all right, so let's back up and look at the rest of this. Anger-driven. Is that fair?
I do think that's fair. Yeah, absolutely.
Drug-fueled, I mean, that was necessary. Absolutely. That is like what we know him for is his drugs.
Right.
Would you have put it somewhat differently?
Well, it gets complicated. So maybe I'll just jump forward and say I landed on 8 for this. Is it too early to get in? Because
it's a little early, but I'm fine with that. Let's hear out your 8, and then I'll tell you where I land.
So I landed at 8 because I think this does capture for the general public. This would reflect back to them who they saw as Hunter Thompson.
Anger-driven, drug-fueled,
all this stuff down the line.
Obscenity-laced. There's a lot of hyphens in this.
Yeah, guns, like that. It's all there. They're painting a picture.
Totally. You can picture a Ralph Steadman image in your mind as you're reading this.
It's also funny, this happens with times whoever wrote this couldn't help but try to parody Thompson's writing in the production of it.
I kind of like that they do that.
So shot and killed, I'd expect it in parentheses, but like, you sick bastard.
Yeah.
So all that makes complete sense to me. But I agree that you might want to start there. Rage is the predominant feature, or righteous indignation, you could call it, if you want to say, be a little more generous with the term. He's not just angry at the world. He's angry about specific things for specific reasons. But then I start to lose fervor as we go down the line. So that's when I get to drug-fueled. I grant the accuracy of it, but I wonder if leaning into that, we're starting to put the cart before the horse and miss what is important, which would lead back into what when they said, oh, yeah, that's the cartoony character of it. That is only if we see the drugs and alcohol and the madness as the point, which so many high school kids do.
I did. Well, that's how I came to him, yeah.
Right, and that's how it was pitched to me. But when I finally read it for myself, it's not really that. The drugs are mixed up in it, so it'd be silly not to mention them. But if you say that he's a drug-crazed lunatic, I don't think that's what he is, or what he started out as, or why he should be famous for.
I don't know. I mean, that passage from the first page of Fear and Loathing about the suitcase full of drugs.
We had 2 bags of grass, 75 pellets of mescaline, 5 sheets of high-powered blotter acid, a salt shaker half full of cocaine, a whole galaxy of multicolored uppers, downers, screamers, laughers, also a quarter tequila, quarter rum, case of beer, pint of raw ether, 2 dozen amyl. Not that we needed all that for the trip, but once you get locked into a serious drug collection, the tendency is to push it as far as you can.
That and the daily routine thing about all the drugs he takes throughout the day.
3 p.m., rise. 3:05, Chivas Regal with morning papers. Smokes Dunhills. 3:45, cocaine. 3:50, another glass of Chivas, another Dunhill. 4:05 p.m., by the way, first cup of coffee and a Dunhill. 4:15, cocaine. 4:16, orange juice and another Dunhill. 4:30, cocaine. 4:54, cocaine. 5:05, cocaine. 5:11, coffee, Dunhills. 5:30, get more ice in the Chivas. Cocaine at 5:45, 6 o'clock, smoking grass to take the edge off the day. 7 p.m.
The day, 3 hours into it.
Which some of it is a joke, but it is a primary association with him.
Association, yeah, exactly.
Character, not work. That's the point you're making?
Right, and the daily routine is something else, because we can get into how serious he's being or how performative.
So is this where you started to deduct points? Because there's 2 other things I really want to talk about in this first line of the obit.
Well, that's where I started to deduct points. I don't object to it. We're drifting off topic is where when I got to drug-fueled as the second hyphenate. Obscenity-laced, I started to get annoyed.
Oh, really? I love his use of obscenity.
Yes, agreed. But we've already hit anger-driven, and the obscenity is a subset of the anger. And so when you say anger-driven, and then, again, another hyphenate, obscenity-laced, in the same run-on sentence, you're doubling down on that. And then we're missing the point, because the obscenity was a function of the anger, and if we're adding it as if its own separate category, we're drifting off what he was doing. The obscenity was a way to communicate the anger that was about other things.
Well, okay, I want to get to the last piece of this, though. Broke down the wall between reader and writer, writer and subject. Where do you come down on that piece of things? Because I'm not even sure I understand what they're trying to say.
Yeah, no, I wrote down here parody of lit crit nonsense. And
okay.
I think at that point, the sentence has totally lost me.
Well, what do you think they are trying? Well, I can't believe you were so generous as to give it a B. You're an easy A.
Well, I said because this would communicate in a nutshell who this person is. But if the idea of breaking barriers, changing things, altering the experience, if that's what you want to communicate, fine. But exactly as what you're saying, what do you think that means? I think nothing.
Should they have used the term journalist in here? That was the other thing. They just say writer for Rolling Stone, which that's sort of implied, but would have thought that his primary professional identity, even if it's Tom Wolfe's new journalism or whatever else you call it, I feel like that's actually missing here. He is a figure who needs to be understood as a journalist. I sort of wrestle with it because he's so singular and weird that way.
A lot of his writing later is commentary, which isn't journalism necessarily.
All right, I'll give you another omission. The word gonzo's not in here. It feels like that almost is glaring oversight.
Drug-fueled writer for Rolling Stone and pioneer of gonzo journalism. You're right, that is missing. I think that should have been there. I actually would have liked that more than obscenity-laced prose.
All right, are you sticking with your 8?
It does what it's supposed to do, but I quibble with the points I made.
All right, well, I'm giving it a 6. I really think Gonzo should be in here. I think they could have gone a different direction. So I'm doing 6 on behalf of you so that we land at a solid C. They pass, but just barely. All right, category 2, 5 things I love about you. Here, Devin and I will develop a list of 5 things that offer a different angle on who this person was and how they lived. I'm dying to hear you lead off here. I feel like you got stuff to say.
Yeah, sure. So this will allow me to pick up exactly where I left off, because the first thing I had was subtle stylist, that I think he's a really good writer. And so I want to drop the needle there first, that I really like his writing as writing. If you leave out the profanity and the drug-fueled madness and all the things he's famous for, I think you can just read his writing aloud as good writing. In a particular sort of way, he said, of all things, in a letter he wrote to a provisional member of the Vietnamese government after the fall of Saigon, he wrote, "I'm not an especially good typist, but I am one of the best writers currently using the English language as both a musical instrument and a political weapon." And I love that combination of musical instrument and political weapon, I think, is really apt. And the way that works, like the specific cocktail that creates, is really special and powerful and worth paying attention to. Especially for what he was trying to do. He's famous to anyone who cares as a sort of bridge writer, and this I think came up in the obit as well. Coming out of the heyday of the 60s into the cynicism of the 70s or whatever, that he lived in that bridge.
Yes.
He bridged between the two, struggling to sort them out. And
the famous passage in Fear and Loathing about the wave cresting kind of captures.
Yeah, that's where I'm going, and that's one of I was trying to think of what passage would best exemplify why I think he's a good writer, and that most famous of all is a good one.
Yeah.
But I think it's specifically, he said elsewhere that part of the problem why the hippie movement fizzled out is it moved forward into the 70s with neither the artistry and aesthetic endeavor of the Beat generation and without adopting the radical politics of the New Left. So you got this vapid middle ground that was neither artistic nor political. And so his attempt to develop a style of writing that is a musical instrument and political weapon exemplifies where that middle ground might have been, what should have been. It's both the high and the low point of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when he's all messed up in his hotel room looking out at how did we get here?
We had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. So now, less than 5 years later, you can go up on a steep hill in Las Vegas and look west. And with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high water mark. That place where the wave finally broke and rolled back.
And that beautiful prose has neither profanity nor drug inducement or any of that stuff, but I think it has the lyrical beats with the political angst and energy and urgency that he thinks we needed to inject it into the writing going out of that generation.
There is this sort of romanticism of the youth movement in the 1960s, this period of hyper-idealism that does crash. And if you want to understand the sentiment of American history and what was happening at the time, he's as good a figure as any. So what is your thing number 1 exactly?
Subtle stylist. Not that he's subtle exactly, but that he's not known as being a stylist. And if you go back to his work and think check him out on that level. Just grab a passage of one of his books at random and don't even worry about what he's writing about. Just read it aloud. You'll find some very, very fine writing.
Well, let's keep going. Let's return to this. All right. I wonder if you'll sign off on this based on what I'm hearing. My thing number 2, I said human guinea pig. This is in a few ways, but the stuff about the drugs in the suitcase, this is more about him as a character than him as a writer. This is somebody who seems to test the boundary of what it means to quote unquote handle your drugs or handle your shit. And I find that character very exciting because it almost seems like he's trying to choose the exact right drug for the exact perfect occasion in every waking minute of his life. And that's cartoonish. It's not real. But I like that somebody is trying that experiment. One thing that in the book, Gonzo, which it's a biography, but it's passages of other people talking about him, it comes up a lot. People are like, it feels absurd to say it, but moderation of his drug use. I also think I wanted to introduce the word guinea pig because pig is going to come up again.
You just got me there with the pig. It's famous at the end of the Kentucky Derby. In a nation ruled by swine, all pigs are upwardly mobile.
Is that the last line of that? That's great.
That's the jacket copy he wrote for Fear and Loathing when he sort of explained.
Okay. What do you make of the character? I think that this is how I want to describe him. Human guinea pig. He's somebody who's sort of like experimenting on himself and using his body and his brain and his mind. He creates this character that we do have a primary association with all kinds of drugs. And there is a humor to it all that he becomes synonymous with a certain kind of drug user, but not exactly a junkie or addict. It's more like somebody who is right at the edge of somebody who can handle their shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's interesting. I do see what you're saying. I guess I do, in large part, agree, because that character is funny to follow around Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Like when he and his lawyer can't get off the carousel bar because it won't stop.
To be clear, Hunter S. Thompson is a prick, I think. I mean, I think that he's funny, but I get the sense, especially testimonials from the family and the women in his life, like this guy's an asshole in a lot of ways. I think he's also a lot of fun to be around and a partier. Did you not come away from the research with like he's kind of a dick?
I have no idea. I know some of the stories you're referring to, and of course, he was accused of assault,
which needs to be noted. Yeah,
it does. Although by a lot of public standards now in the post-Me Too movement, the accusation is mild compared to what other, that he is alleged to have assaulted someone, as in like grabbed someone in anger, not in sexuality.
Right.
So I know those stories about him not being
a gentleman.
But I say the one thing I'd add to that, if you read his letters, like his correspondence to his friends, like there's no dickishness in that.
I agree with that. There is love and affection. And even his son says, I didn't understand it as love and affection until, got older and came to understand my father in a different way. So I want to be careful. I'm not calling him a prick in my thing number 2. I'm calling him a human guinea pig.
Yeah, so that too, I don't know, we lost the thread here a little.
Yeah, a little. Let's move on. What do you have for thing number 3?
I have a whole bunch of these, so I have to decide, because there's so many funny, quirky, is Hunter Thompson, if you're going to.
Yeah.
But I'd like to rise to the top, Alpine Peacock Rancher.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Say more. This is about his Al Ranch and Aspen.
Al Farm.
Al Farm.
He bought as soon as he got money for, I guess after the Vegas book, probably. But anyway, so he after he took whatever money he had, and it was enough to make a down payment on this land. So he bought 100+ acres of ranch land outside of Aspen, downhill from Aspen.
Before Aspen was Aspen. I mean, when it was a more affordable place, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was really much more rural, even if Aspen had some sheen to it. As soon as you left there wouldn't have been any. And so it was pretty remote. And he set up shop there in a little cabin and liked to live the mountain lifestyle, but rather than having livestock, he raised a lot of peacocks.
Yeah.
And so you'll hear a lot of stories of him sitting on the front porch, hanging out, watching the peacocks mill around in the yard. We've come from the Mountain West in a way, and imagining sitting on the front porch of a ranch house, looking at the rolling hills with a bunch of peacocks fluttering around while you get weird with your friends. I mean, I can dig it. I'm there
that's
for
a nice image. That's a nice image.
So that's what he would go home to when he would leave the madness of whatever he was reported to. Like, I'm home, peacocks.
With full plumage out, like, and welcome, Hunter. Yeah.
Yes, great. Exactly. Daddy. It's just, you can only imagine. So I just love that. It's a nice counterpoint to a lot of the other stuff that was home to him.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me go for thing number 4. This is kind of personal with you and me. Letter writer. I love his letters. His letters are awesome. You and I, when we left college, we were like, we need to keep up with letters, which we have completely fucking dropped.
Yeah, before the internet ruined everything.
Yeah, but I've got them in a box somewhere. You and I actually had some great letter exchanges, and I'm bringing this up because we kind of need to start doing that again.
Yeah.
Or I'd like to entertain the idea, because there is an art to writing a great letter. The one that's really famous that he sent to Tom Wolfe, I thought I might read a couple excerpts from this. Dear Tom, you worthless scum-sucking bastard. I just got off your letter from February 25th from Lagrange Hotel in Roma. You swine. Here you are running around fucking Italy in that filthy white suit at $1,000 a day, laying all kinds of stone gibberish and honky bullshit on those poor Italians. He doesn't say Italians, he uses slur. Who can't tell the difference, while I'm out here in the middle of these goddamn frozen mountains in a death battle with the taxman and nursing cheap wine, while my dogs go hungry and my cars explode, and a legion of Nazi lawyers makes my life a goddamn wobbly nightmare. That's the first paragraph. Second paragraph, you decadent pig. And then I'll skip ahead a little bit. And then, because he does have this The reason I came across this is I knew Tom Wolfe had said some stuff about Hunter S. Thompson as part of his new journalism, and Hunter S. Thompson took issue with that. I'll have your goddamn femurs ground into bone splinters if you ever mention my name again in connection with that horrible new journalism shuck you're promoting. Ah, the greed, this malignancy, where will it end? What filthy weight in your soul has made you sink so low? Dr. Bloor was right. Hyenas are taking over the world. Oh, Jesus, what else can I say except to warn you once again that the hammer of justice looms and that your filthy white suit will become a flaming shroud. Sincerely, Hunter. I mean, if I'm Tom Wolfe, I'm delighted to get that letter in the mail, right? They are friends, right? And that's the thing, is that Tom Wolfe has stories about like Hunter S. Thompson showing up at dinner with an air horn and like clearing the place out.
There is him at his most performative. That is like a one-man show.
But letters are a good place for that.
Yeah, totally. Stuff. And I absolutely agree. And I'll just say it as a personal note, going back to, I remember getting a letter from you once that said, I began this with both a beer and a cup of coffee on the table in front of me because I wasn't sure what kind of letter I wanted to write.
I might have been trying to channel somebody in that.
That was a great way to read on.
So where are we going with this? Yeah.
But strapping in.
I do think that as a thing to love and to do the sort of famous and gravy thing and turn it back on us, that there is something that you can express in a letter you cannot express in an email or in a conversation or in a podcast or any other form or modality. That is fantastic sometimes. And even the phrase fear and loathing comes out of a letter that he wrote to, I forget what it was, but it's when John F. Kennedy dies. He has this line about, there's no human being within 500 miles to whom I can communicate anything, much less the fear and loathing that is on me after today's murder. That's my number 4 letter writer.
No, that's a great one. I really like that. Especially going back in the research, reading the letters is some of the most enjoyable stuff to dip back into. And it's just seeing his private correspondence.
Exactly. That's kind of what sparked this.
He had a long-term friendship with former Colorado Senator Gary Hart, who then, one-time presidential candidate. Gary Hart was really mad about Hunter Thompson's coverage of the 72 campaign and had objected to that book. Thompson writes him a heckling letter at one point asking if he hired his lawyers yet or whatever. And this correspondence turns into being friends because Hunter Thompson was also his constituent as a resident of Colorado. Yeah. And so then their letters go into asking very intricate questions about policy and things like that, and then morph into later friendship and support. And it's a very interesting arc to read through.
I saw a documentary that had Jimmy Carter and Pat Buchanan and McGovern, like very prominent politicians, all wanting to weigh in on him. This is not some guy who's to the side. He is a central figure in the politics of the 70s as a journalist, but as a commentator. I think to your bridging point, like he's a more important figure than is maybe remembered and not just a drug-addled, obscenity-laced guy.
Exactly.
All right, so what do you got for number 5?
I guess I'll go back to the academics, and I really like how he performed or popularized what we now know as the academic discipline of cultural studies. Which, to put it dryly, the idea, if you're not familiar with the academic discipline or couldn't define it, the idea of cultural studies is sort of the study of how structures of power operate through social phenomenon.
Yeah.
How power and politics function inside the social activities we otherwise take for granted. That grew up through the 70s and became an established discipline. It's now under great attack, of course.
Right.
This is where things like critical race theory would come from. But he was an early public version of that sort of thinking, and I think there's no better example than the Kentucky Derby piece. He concedes at the end he didn't see the race and says midway through it that we didn't give a hoot in hell about what was happening on the track. We had come to watch the real beasts perform. And that idea that this is a social phenomenon that happens every year, but why it happens, how it happens, who these people are, what it all means against the backdrop of the country at this moment, that's the story.
He's talking about the audience. He's not talking about the event.
Yeah, if it wasn't clear, the real beasts were the Southern gentry who come out for this.
Right.
And that is, what you might see in academic articles or something like that. This happens every year. Mardi Gras happens. The Derby happens. We do these things, these public rituals. But what do they mean? What do they come from? What norms do they prop up? This sort of critique is very useful, very important, and emerges as a very necessary part of academic work. And it's typical for Hunter Thompson. He not only is bridge figure, I should say, typical for the bridge figure he was, he not only saw and understood this, he found a way to perform it that met a public appetite. Rather than being a dry academic article, he found a way to do this sort of work in a way that was publicly consumable.
It's entertaining.
Yeah. And that's another moment where that you could see him presaging the modern blogosphere and all the people with video or podcasts.
Yeah.
Like, I will get into this and break it down, and you'll want to hear it, even though I'm making real points and on urgent topics.
I mean, that's so interesting, because I had a couple other things here about his origins as a sports writer and a doctor without a degree, because he never finishes college. I mean, he goes.
It was a correspondence degree from something like Theosophical Institute or something
like that. He goes to Florida State for a little bit, but he just becomes a writer, right? But to your point about laying down the groundwork for an academic discipline, whether or not it was identified at that time or not, there's also a real famous and gravy theme in there of making sense of pop culture. The Kentucky Derby is pop culture, and it's significant not because of the race. It's significant because of what are people rallying around for and why. What does it allow a group to express that ultimately needs to be understood as how does that relate to other power structures across society? That's what I hear in your description. Which is,
that, if you remember, at the end of that, it's really sobering how, it's a funny word to use in his
context of Hunter S. Thompson.
It says the penultimate piece, where the piece really ends, is he's driving away with Stedman, and he says, I've been thinking about this, as Stedman said. We came down here to see this terrible scene, people all pissed out of their minds and vomiting on themselves and all that. And now, you know what? It's us. And so saying, like, we are the spectacle. But then the paragraph break in, huge Pontiac ballbuster blowing through traffic to the expressway. A radio news bulletin says the National Guard is massacring students at Kent State and Nixon is still bombing Cambodia. This performance of Southern decadence is happening in the middle of a world that is also going forward, on fire, and it's horror show and Fear and Loathing.
Yeah.
And that sort of making sense of both the power flows and the absence of responsibility for these kind of things was the real message he drives home, which is an interesting place to end up. And again, what gets unfortunately popularly processed is an obscenity-laced, drug-fueled rampage.
Yeah, there is something much more significant being said, and we're distracted by the personality and the caricature of the guy who curses a lot and is doing a bunch of drugs.
Yeah, especially the way it passes through the membrane of popular consumption. Because if you read it, the piece doesn't let you miss that when it lands on that, when it ends, like snapping back into coherent, almost reporter speak about this is what's happening right now. This is the big picture. This is what's outside the snow globe of this drunken mess. It leaves you there. So even if you've participated in the binge, you're left holding a book, thinking like, ugh.
Yeah.
Like massacring students and bombing Cambodia. The writing itself doesn't let you go with that, but only when people start to talk about it and say, well, I only remember the drunken hijinks.
Yeah.
Do we get that caricature?
Let's recap 5 things. So, number 1, you said subtle stylist. Number 2, I went with human guinea pig. Number 3, you said
alpine peacock rancher.
Number 4, I went with letter writer. And number 5,
public cultural studies. Can I add a honorable mention?
You can. I'll probably cut it out, but sure.
Yeah, that's fine. I was hugely tickled, and it's morbid, but that he titled his suicide note, "Football Season is Over." I just think, as someone who also goes into a subtle verb of mourning, and, in late winter, I thought that's just really, really great. Well, there's nothing left to live for.
Good. Wow. Okay. Let's take a break.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Why are there ridges on Reese's peanut butter cups? Probably so they never slip from her hands. Could you imagine? I'd lose it. Luckily, Reese's thought about that. Wonder what else they think about. Probably chocolate and peanut butter.
Category 3, One Love. In this category, we will each choose one word or phrase that characterizes this person's loving relationships. First, we will review their family life data. So there are 2 marriages, one to Sandy in 1963, Hunter was 26, one son, Juan Fitzgerald, born in 64 when Hunter was 27. The couple divorced in 1980 when Hunter was 43. He got married again in 2003 to Anita. He was 66 at the time, remained married to her until his death in 2005 at age 67. So just a year and some change. No kids with Anita. What do you got here? Did you come up with something?
I went away from that side of it, something you mentioned.
Okay. As we were talking before the recording, I said, you can talk about friendships. Is that where you went?
It is where I went.
All right. So where'd you go?
The one word, and I cheated in the tradition of the New York Times obit and used a hyphenate. So I said deliverable hang.
Oh, all right.
I think he showed up, reading his letters and accounts, he showed up for his friends and hangers-on as the person he was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Too often, unfortunately, it was the Gonzo maniac. If you showed up at the farm looking for that, he would give it to you. But more interestingly, like when Gary Hart writes to him in despair after his sex scandals derailed his political campaign, you get very different kind of letters. Or George McGovern getting through that campaign, or when he offers his services to Jimmy Carter to help get him elected. He seems to very carefully show up as the friend that's needed or wanted. That's what I most see in his personal relationships.
I'm good with that. I did make a quick list of other famous friends. Johnny Depp, obviously. Jack Nicholson, Bill Murray, Don Johnson, Warren Zevon, Tom Wolfe, and, of course, Jimmy Buffett. Tom Wolfe and Jimmy Buffett, Famous and Gravy episodes that people can check out in the archives.
Buffett also lived in Aspen for a while, so they were a real
I think so did Nicholson.
Scene.
I think a lot of these people did, actually. Awesome. Okay, well, I'll give you my one word. I did go into this marriage, family life. I wrote confined pigsty. I want to get back to the pig thing here because he uses the word swine. I feel like we need to revive that word. I don't call people swine often enough. It comes up a lot. It's an insult he flings around.
Yeah, to the point that it becomes affected, I'm afraid.
Maybe. But do you hear that word thrown around?
Maybe just enough.
I'm saying that it's a great insult and I wish we had it. I do think it is an awfully messy home. I think that when it comes to his relationships with women, he is something of a pig. He's also very smart. Pigs are very smart animals. And because I'm trying to draw out the metaphor, I went into some of the behavioral challenges that arise when pigs are in confinement. You're a vegetarian these days, in part because of the kind of animal welfare qualities of it. You've gotten on my case before for eating bacon.
Appropriately.
Yeah, okay. In confined settings, such as commercial farms.
Swine.
There it is.
Starting now.
Yeah. Right. In confined settings such as commercial farms, pigs may display increased aggression, especially when unfamiliar individuals are mixed. This can lead to stress and tail biting. Pigs are also, for what it's worth, to your point about friendship, they're very loyal animals. They form strong bonds with their pig companions and often their caregivers. They seek comfort from familiar individuals when stressed and have been known to exhibit protective behaviors towards members of their social group.
Yeah, have you never befriended a pig? Or swine, if you will.
I think I am, honestly, right now. But no, I mean...
Point taken. I'm taking that as a compliment.
All right. So confined pigsty. Let's move on. Category 4, net worth. In this category, Devin and I are each going to write down our numbers ahead of time. Then we will talk a little bit about our reasoning, and we will finally look up the net worth number in real time to see who's closest. Lastly, we'll place this person on the Famous and Gravy net worth leaderboard. His commercial peak and the best-selling books, like Fear and Loathing is the number one. And I think while he is still profitable in his publishing, his work deteriorates after the 70s and into the 80s and 90s. So I steer towards a lower number.
I steer towards a very low number.
All right. Well, Devin Fromm wrote down $0.
Michael Osborne wrote down $2 million.
All right. The actual net worth is $5 million. I think that's probably mostly the value of the Colorado property. You went with 0. You thought he died with nothing. Did you want to speak to it more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally confident of the 0. I'm giving that as more of a performative number. But I would think, for a lot of the reasons you said, he was not a high output guy. He did famous stuff and then really crashed and burned. He must have made some money out of the 2 major studio movies.
I think he's very involved. And I also did wonder if there were speaking fees. You know, I don't know that
but he wasn't doing in later years. He didn't do a lot of that.
No, and even his interviews are hard to listen to. He always mumbled, but like it gets pretty bad, you know, after 1980. He's not an easy voice to hear out.
And I would think because he lived kind of wildly, and he had, you know, an expensive property to keep up. I mean, it's worth a lot of money. You're quite right about that. But they don't maintain themselves. And so I could see him as someone who's in debt or highly leveraged. And so the point is whatever he had has got to be offset by obligations, commitments, etc.
I agree, but I do think that he's also on people's case about money, too. He doesn't, money is not an afterthought to him. He will hound people for cash, you know.
One of his letters that in the Trails of the Collector, where he included when he returned a sleeping bag to a mail order company, saying it was not as good a value as he could find at the sports store in Aspen.
All right, before we move on, let's put him on the Famous and Gravy net worth leaderboard.
You see that his funeral cost $3 million?
Yeah, and actually, we should speak to the funeral. He did actually fire his ashes out of a cannon.
Yeah.
Right.
When I said that at the top, I was not coming from nowhere. I won't actually be doing that, I don't think.
All right. So at $5 million, he is in the 98th percentile. This is the bottom of the barrel for Famous and Gravy. Other Famous and Gravy alums with $5 million. This is a good list. He is in the company with Yogi Berra, Fred Willard, Joan Didion, another new journalist, Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, and finally Oliver Sacks.
Huh.
That's a dinner table I want to sit at. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that better than, definitely. I would hang.
Yes. Are you kidding? That's the fun table. Pee Wee and Oliver Sacks and Hunter Thompson and Joe Didion and Fred Willard. Yeah. And Yogi Berra for his baseball players
right.
go.
Yogi Berra, yeah. When you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah.
That's a great, my favorite Yogi Berra.
That's really good. All right, let's move on. Category 5, Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
They're the Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
Yeah, the Achievers.
Yes, and proud we are of all of them.
In this category, we choose a trophy, an award, a cameo, an impersonation, or some other form of a hat tip that shows a different side of this person. I'll tell you what I went. There's a Conan O'Brien episode where Conan goes to the owl farm and they are firing automatic weapons together. One, it's kind of like unsettling to see Conan with automatic weapons. He just doesn't look comfortable with them. But they're firing at a teddy bear and a cutout of Bill Buckner, which is also an episode of Famous and Gravy.
I can cut Bill Buckner down with this machine gun.
We're going to go in close for that.
These are the strangest conversations I believe I've had in a while.
Whoa! Good shot, man. Excellent.
I got to get that bear.
All right, hit the bear.
Go for it.
Hit the bear. Very good.
I like the safety guy just said, move your whiskey before you start shooting.
I'm not a firearms guy. I definitely have friends who are like Hunter S. Thompson, where their politics is in one place, but their relationship to guns and firearms is in a surprisingly different place. I kind of like the idea of going to the farm, and I like seeing Conan with Hunter. So that's my Little Lebowski.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And I hear, like, as someone who, has politics different from some of the places I've lived, I have fired many a weapon on many a ranch property.
All right, what'd you go here?
I went, slightly different direction in the almost meta, and I went with also a shout-out to fellow Occidental alum, Terry Gilliam.
Oh, nice. Director of Fear and Loathing and the one American on the Monty Python team.
And directed many other things. He was also the writer of the Fear and Loathing movie and did a lot of work on that film. And it really grasped and packaged Hunter Thompson almost better than Thompson himself. I think he really, almost everything we've covered and we've talked out and found a way to get to as we've been doing this today is in that movie because Gilliam completely got it already.
So, should people go back and watch that movie? I actually, I only watched clips and getting ready for this. Like, is it a text that captures what is important? That monologue we were talking about earlier about the wave cresting, I do remember that vividly in the movie. The other memory I have of that movie is that it captures the experience of being on psychedelics better than any other movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, before I answer your question, part of where I'm going with it captures so much nicely. Because you're right, like the wave scene, Gilliam understands Thompson's work well enough to let it speak for itself where necessary. So in that moment when the wave scene comes up, Johnny Depp literally reads it aloud. Whereas there are other times when lines we associate with Hunter Thompson's work are just written by Gilliam himself into the script. And there's one I quoted all the time and did not realize was not Thompson himself until I reread the book for this. When he's in the movie, when Raoul Duke's saying goodbye to his lawyer and said,
"There he goes, one of God's own prototypes. A high-powered mutant of some kind never even considered for mass production. Too weird to live, and too rare to die."
That is not in the novel.
Is that right? I always thought it was.
I did too. And if you ask the internet, you'll get that as a Thompson quote. But it is not. Gilliam wrote that in the screenplay.
Well, I'll be damned.
Things that capture what he was doing, even when Thompson didn't write the words himself. And then other times captures the sort of the horror and the despair of it in a way that doesn't, to quote Thompson himself, with the right kind of eyes, you can see it in the writing.
Yeah.
But like the nadir of the diner scene where the Raoul Duke's character takes a piece of pie and slinks out, and just how like sad and off the rails that's all gotten, and everything that's gone wrong with the 60s. It's there in the text, but it's not amplified and given color the way that Terry Gilliam does. So he gets the whole package so perfectly. Like, the ultimate meta hat tip that like, I see you, and I can double down on it and broadcast out what it is. But going back, whether we should go, the movie is sort of dangerous again, because if you don't have the right kind of eyes, if you're not paying attention, you might just see the drug escapade. A certain kind of younger person appreciates that for that. But if you only get it as that, I think we're back to the Times obituary. You're not seeing what's really there.
One of the things that I think you're pointing out that you're right, like if you want to understand Hunter S. Thompson, don't watch him in a movie, don't watch him in an interview, don't listen to a podcast about him, read him, like really read him, like he needs to be read. And to your first line of the obit point, we need to draw him out more as writer, author, journalist, whatever, point people to the text, because in as much as there's a contribution and a legacy, that's where you're going to find it, not in the caricature, not in the Ralph Steadman pictures, not in the performances in the movie. I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay. You can say you're welcome if you need to.
Yeah. We'll work up to it. I think with reading, then the movie comes alive. And I'd be curious to know.
Understanding the primary text is that's all I mean. It's not to say those other things are not valuable, but that if you don't have that as your foundation and bedrock, then you're missing critical elements here.
Yeah, that's right. I'll try this sometime and assign students to watch it and tell me what they think. Like, what do you see if you come with nothing?
Do a little A/B testing and see.
Yeah. Some of you watch this, some of you watch a blank wall, and we'll discuss.
Or take 5 dried grams and see where we go. All right, let's take one more break.
Michael.
Yeah.
On Sundays, I like to treat myself.
How do you like to treat yourself?
Pedicure.
Oh, sure.
A foamy latte. Is there anything that you do?
I like to collect great things. For example, did you know right now at Half Price Books, there is a leather-bound collector's edition of Muhammad Ali, His Life and Times, signed by Muhammad Ali? Leonard Cohen, Stranger Music, Selected Poems and Songs, signed copy.
So they curate things only from our episodes?
I think this is just a selection of some of the many special items they have, and they're rare collections at Half Price Books. People bring very valuable items, and Half Price compensates and recognizes that and makes them available for all of us.
I think I'm just going to check out the all-new hpb.com, where I can find my local store, plan my next trip, maybe even buy online to pick up in store, possibly create a wish list, and more.
Okay, category 6, words to live by. In this category, Devin and I will each choose a quote. These are either words that came out of this person's mouth or was said about them. We've brought up a lot of his quotes and text. What did you go with here?
Yeah, so I went with some of his writing that I actually do use in my classes all the time when I'm finding out that nobody knows who this person is. And continue doubling down on the theme as a writer, because I think he's not only a good writer, he understands writing and is very useful as an object lesson of how writing works, how a writer operates, where Thompson writes about the process of writing. And he begins, one of the few ways I can almost be certain I'll understand something is by sitting down and writing about it. Because by forcing yourself to write about it and putting it down in words, you can't avoid having your say on the subject. You might be wrong, but you have to think about it very intensely to write about it. I find that by putting things in writing, I can understand them and see them a little more objectively. For words are merely tools, and if you use the right ones, you can actually put even your life in order, if you don't lie to yourself or use the wrong words.
Jesus, Stephen, that's really good. Yeah, that's great.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
You clearly care more about this category than the net worth category, but yeah.
Yes, that's accurate. But yeah, I think as a single statement, that's very well said about what writing is ultimately for. And as someone who teaches a lot of writing, I find that you try to get past, one, that this is some task like learning multiplication tables or something you want to pick up, that really writing is conduit for understanding and projecting.
No, I didn't introduce you as Dr. Fromm, and of course you didn't introduce me as Dr. Osborne. Doctor.
But, glad I'm not sick.
Right, not those kinds of doctors. But I don't know if I ever told you, I had a committee member who, was writing my dissertation, and he told me to write the first draft of my dissertation longhand. He said, there's something about the magic to pen to paper that forces you to slow down your thinking and organize your thoughts. And I hated doing it, and I didn't do it for the whole thing, but for the introduction, I did. And the first draft is strong for that reason. I had to get into my PhD before I was ever introduced to this idea of writing to think, not writing to complete a task or writing to publish or to get attention or whatever, but actually as a mental exercise to sort out my own thoughts. It's interesting that words in my head exist in an invisible way. They're not actually real until they exist on a page somewhere and until they're brought into the physical universe. And there is something, magic about that. And that's what I hear in that quote.
Yeah, totally. Because then when you write them down, they exist in relation to one another rather than in the ephemeral stream of your messy consciousness.
Well put.
then you start seeing the relationships and internalizing that. So, and I asked it as an exercise, just read something, look at something, and write down what it is.
Yeah.
And forcing yourself to describe that. You make decisions, you process and that. So I really like that as the digestion. And the second half of that is the outgoing part about you can even put your life in order. This idea that if you learn to write well, like if you develop yourself as a writer, really what you are doing, I should say, is taking on the responsibility of telling your own story.
Sense making, yes, an autobiography.
So you want to digest going in, but you also want to organize going out. And so you can tell your own story. Don't leave your story to someone else. You put the right words in the right order and tell it in your own way. And that's what writing is ultimately for. And Thompson is very clear about it in a way that, again, the drug-addled, profanity-riddled maniac, it's not that. And I also think that's a side bit. What I was attempting when I first started bringing him up to students is this idea of explaining what writing is and marrying that to individual personality. And so you can be who you are and still write for you. Write well, but write for you, not for some imaginary, bland academic ideal. That writing is a toolbox, it's a craft. And so even someone like Hunter Thompson, who's famous for being a wreck and a maniac, actually had to sit down and write clearly so that you could have that picture of him as such.
Yeah.
Like it's an important irony.
Yeah, it is. Well, and especially one that all but leaves him in the later stages of his life. But nevertheless, words to live by.
Yeah, what do you have?
Politics is the art of controlling your environment. And that's it. Politics is the art of controlling your environment. This is associated with the 1973 book, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. What I hear in that is, one, I think that something that's interesting about him, he is addicted to political coverage in the 70s. He really enjoys the experience of being a political journalist. The art of controlling your environment, I had never thought of it that way before. If you are able to manipulate the story and the environmental context in which a story is told, that you can get away with a lot. And I think we see that in a lot of different places. I think it's just a helpful framing of how politics works. And we haven't talked at all about his run for sheriff in 1970 in Aspen, but I think that was an instructive experience for him, and he came close to winning. And I had always understood that as a prank, and the more I looked at that campaign, I think that there was an element of seriousness to it.
Oh, yeah. I had that as a candidate on my things I like about you. Some of his thoughts on civic administration.
Totally.
I think, wanted to replace streets with grass walking malls and pass a local ordinance that you couldn't build higher than would obscure the mountain line.
Rename Aspen into Fat Cities to scare off the real estate investors.
Yeah. Somebody tried that here in LA when developers priced all the artists out of the arts district. Someone petitioned to have it renamed Douchebag Alley, which I really, one, reminds me of that, and two, I would wish would happen because that would just be great.
Where do you live? I'm in Douchebag Alley. God, that'd be rough.
That's where my map. Yeah, totally. It's on the map. I'm not kidding.
Shout out to Brent. Anyway, so.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Category 7, Man in the Mirror. Fairly simple. Did this person like their reflection? Yes or no? This is not about beauty, but rather a question of self-confidence versus self-judgment. I suspect you are out of your comfort zone on this one, so I'll let you start.
Yeah, I am entirely out of my comfort. You said it's fairly simple, and I don't
find this simple at all. Yeah.
I think what makes it hard for him is he appears to us to have lived his life in two distinct chapters, like the coming up and the going down. Coming up part, I think the answer is there, clearly, yes. He's incredibly self-confident and he believes in himself. To a ridiculous extent, that his flagrant disregard for authority through his whole life. He was discharged from the Army saying he was unresponsive to authority or something
from the
like
Navy,
that.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Air Force. Yeah.
Air Force, right, yeah. So there's that. And the index of this I find most compelling is he started keeping carbon copies of every letter he wrote when he was like 20, long before he was famous. So he was quite confident that he would be famous and people would want his letters later.
Totally, yeah.
And this sort of, so that person was in love with their reflection, and not in a narcissistic way, but the person he saw in the mirror was a world historical figure of import and respect. But in the later half of his life, I think that changes. And we see that as he becomes a caricature of himself, he gets very displeased with the caricature he sees in the mirror. And he's on the record about that. It comes up in the obituary, how he didn't like being cartooned in Doonesbury. And so that person he didn't like looking at in the mirror, but couldn't get away from it either. So I don't know. How did you answer this?
I'm actually very much on the fence. I see your point. I think that there is a sort of like unusual level of self-confidence and self-assuredness when people on interviews asked the question, is there a wasted talent here? Did you do too many drugs and should you have been something more? It's like not even a consideration in a way. And so some of how I'm looking at this question is through that prism. His wife calls him a narcissist. I think we throw around that word a little too easily these days, but I wonder about it. One thing that feels like a lot of people say about him is that he almost becomes trapped by this character. He himself sort of alludes to that. That's kind of weird to me, that you create a character that you can't get away from. Like, I'm sure there's other examples of that, even Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens. And this is the way celebrity operates a lot, is that if you're on a TV show where you become associated with a singular character, Leonard Nimoy and Spock, or Jason Alexander and George Costanza, or whatever. I mean, you could increase the list ad infinitum. I think that if you feel trapped by that particular kind of character, how does that play out in this question? Overall, what did I come to? Because I want to give an answer so we can move on in this category.
It's really quite simple. Let's talk about it for 20 minutes and not get an answer.
I wonder about his capacity for shame and self-reflection. And I guess I default to no, he doesn't like his reflection because he's a little too smart to not be aware of some of the damage he's causing and to not glimpse his own inner darkness in a way that leaves him unsettled. I also think, frankly, it is evident in somebody who fantasizes and then the suicide is a telltale sign. Not that I just want to slap on this label because anybody who dies a death of despair, I'm going to go that direction. But I think on balance, the preponderance of evidence to me suggests, no, he does not like his reflection in the mirror. He embodies an inner conflict that we're using here as an exercise to understand ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. If you say, when he pulls that trigger, the answer is no.
Yeah.
But like when he's set for that interview in 1975, does he like what he's seeing on the screen? I think the answer there would be yes.
Last thought on this. I do think it's kind of incredible that he made it to 67. He thinks it's incredible he made it to 67.
Yeah, he said, I've lived 17 more years than I wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Take him at his word there. All right, let's move on. Category 8, cocktail, coffee, or cannabis. This is where we ask, which one would we most want to do with our dead celebrity?
Yeah, well, this is dead easy for me and not even that interesting. It's cocktail for me, particularly beer. I mean, for all the, the drug alcohol, all that stuff, all that character we're talking about. The thing that comes up the most often is having beers on his porch. In his letters constantly, he even ends the jacket copy of introducing Fear and Loathing. They're like, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go sit naked on the front porch for a while. And entertaining friends, whether in the nude or not, as peacocks wander around and he talks about the sun setting high above the mountain behind him. And just like that, I want in on that. In a letter to Gary Hart, he says, I actually wrote this quote down. He said, save all that talk about no more heroes until we have more time. Like 16 straight hours on my porch with a case of beer. And for all the madness of his work, that slow unfolding of conversation and in the moment time up in the mountains of Owl Farm, I want in on that.
I basically went the exact same direction. I went for something a little bit harder. I was thinking tequila because I want to get in some fucking trouble here. I want to do something stupid, and I...
Well, 16 hours of drinking beer, I mean, give us credit in this imaginative scenario. I think we could...
It just sounds exhausting to me now. I need a nap. Are you kidding me? I mean, so that's why I'm sort of like, let's get some rocket fuel here. Tequila, I always got in trouble with. And I do like the idea of having
on the way down here this morning. Anyway.
I like the idea of having a Hunter S. Thompson story. For all of the darkness that I see in him and for all of the degeneration as he ages, there is a part of me that is still attracted to the Hunter S. Thompson lifestyle as it's caricatured. Like, that still looks fun on some level. And I think I want to be taken to the edge so that I can discover myself, and I mean, I feel like he is interested in the edge of madness and of darkness.
Yeah, that quote to Fear and Loathing is a quote from Dr. Johnson. It says, he who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man. And that's an interesting to like what losing it and going to the edge and what we're actually talking about when we do that. Which I think in a way unites our two things. I hear what you're saying about buy the ticket, take the ride at the same time. And for all of that, and I agree with what you just said. I'm still drawn to that in my later years. To that youthful madness of, no such thing as too much.
All right, I think we've arrived. The final category, the Vanderbeek, named after James Vanderbeek, who famously said in Varsity Blues,
I don't want your life.
In that Varsity Blues scene, James makes a judgment that he does not want a certain kind of life based on just a few characteristics. So here, Devin and I will form a rebuttal to anyone skeptical of how Hunter S. Thompson lived. It's become customary to start with a counter-argument for why you do not want this life. I do think that there is some pain in interpersonal relationships and why we don't have all the information. I think that it took some real work for the people who were close to him to make peace. I think there is damage done The other thing I would say is, I hadn't thought about it until you and I sat down to talk about it. There is a kind of unfortunate consequence of the caricature created. That is the thing that's more remembered than the literary contribution, than the intellect. We sort of more remembered the obscene-laced, drug-addled figure than we do the mind. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think you could have added sort of physical degradation too, like he ran down his body. Reason why one might not take this path through life. There's other famous line, I would never recommend drugs, alcohol, and insanity to anyone, but they've always worked for me.
To a point,
but,
yeah.
So all those things, but I think the last thing you said is the most important there, that he got so trapped inside this caricature that it not only personally wounded him, but it compromised his work. I would have really liked to have seen how his work would function if he'd survived to be a more composed elder statesman talking about what it was all about, and what it was for. Like William Burroughs made it to this last chapter of life in a really interesting way. To see a suit and tie wearing old man, like grandfatherly looking Burroughs talk about his earlier writing was really a useful way to close the loop, and I'm sorry we didn't get that from him.
Yeah, I mean, at times on Famous and Grave, we have talked about an upward staircase journey, and I don't see an upward staircase journey here. I see a degradation and a petering out. It would have been nice to see a different chapter. Okay, those are the counter-arguments. So let's mount the argument. Why would you want this life? What is the case for?
Yeah, I just first wanted to, because we talked about this a little when you were walking me through what we're going to do. I want to make just clear that I'm speaking from the perspective of why I want this life in our world. I'm not saying why I'd want to adopt this life as my own.
Well, that's fine. The way to think about this category is that we are court-appointed public offenders here to present a good faith argument for why there is desirability inside or out. So I can understand why you want this life in the world and why we want this figure to have existed. But, go a little bit more inside if you can.
I mean, I do want to live at a 100-acre spread in the mountains with my peacocks.
I think you could pile on. I think the lifestyle ain't all bad. I mean, I think the idea that you have this place in the mountains with scenic beauty and that you have interesting friends and late-night conversations and,
Yeah, it's essentially like a hillbilly salon where people just come by and rap about stuff.
But an intellectually interesting one.
Well, that's what salon means. In the old-fashioned sense. I don't mean a hairdresser.
That's what I was thinking. Sorry. I got a little tied up on that. As a bald man, I haven't been to a salon in a long time.
In either sense of the word, apparently.
Well, okay.
Moving on.
No, I do think that drugs or no drugs, Coke or no Coke, booze or no booze, whatever the hell else he's got on offer, this would be an interesting hang. I mean, it's sort of to your thing about Deliverable hang. I mean, that's reason. I want to have fun. I want to have dialogue. I want to have conversation. I want to do it in a cool place. And
I want to show up for my friends.
Exactly. I want to show up for my friends. So that's thing number one. I'll go thing number two. Symbol of freedom. Whatever else you make of Hunter S. Thompson, there is a self-determined life here, like at an extreme. Yes, at some point he may become somewhat imprisoned or entrapped by this persona that he creates, but to have even created it in the first place is a statement about what is possible in terms of being the author of your own destiny in your own life. And I think that he does it as an interesting bridge character who emerges at a moment where the question of what is freedom is very much under consideration.
Yeah, and I wrote that down, model for channeling youthful energy in both its destructive and constructive elements. Because another thing I would say, and I have to be careful with this, is sociopolitical disruptor. To disrupt our sense of things and maybe make normal strange to the point where we look at it as not normal or taken for granted. I think that sort of work is really useful and should be done more often.
It's kind of your point number 5.
Demystifying or making strange, unsettling the norms to the point where we can question them and work on them. I think that sort of work is important and urgently necessary.
I think we just need a different word for the same idea, because I completely agree. We need somebody to knock us off a certain pattern or way of thinking and to question through some introduction of disorder.
Yeah, and that's a lot of, I said at one point he was a political surrealist, that when he goes into strange, this performing, this visualization of a certain problem or certain ways of being, the constructive element of that is to make us look at the way we live, to say that sort of what we're doing now. Should we be living like this? Which is not done as a mean-spirited thing. And I think this is, we'll get into, I contrast him with someone like Joan Didion, who you guys mentioned in your pod about as a bubble popper.
Yeah.
I always thought that was one reason I don't like her work, is she pops the bubble and then sneers. Whereas I think Hunter Thompson is always trying to say, if this is wrong, the Kentucky Derby, like, what should we be doing instead? What makes it wrong? And if we identify the problem, then can we move to a solution? Not just, yeah, look, you guys are idiots. They're like, no, like maybe this is wrong, but that admission allows us to steer elsewhere.
It points to reconstruction or construction.
And seeing the wave break and roll back does not mean the wave was stupid. It means we want to think about where did we go wrong? How can we salvage or rediscover all of what made it feel right in the first place?
I'm not used to you being such an optimist. I like that. I think that's important. Okay, let's recap the arguments for why you would want this life. Number one, the lifestyle, especially the setting, but the salon.
Nice.
Number two, I said symbol of freedom and a self-determined life. Number three, we went back to the point you made earlier about a kind of cultural critic. And then number four, message of hope and an opportunity to take apart and question so that we can reconstruct and build something more.
Yeah, never-ending self-improvement as a society.
So with that, James Vanderbeek, I am Hunter S. Thompson, and you want my life. Before we end, if you enjoyed this episode of Famous and Gravy and you've got your phone in your hand, send it to a friend. Share it with somebody who you think might enjoy this interpretation of Hunter S. Thompson's life. All right, Devin, plugs for past shows. If people enjoyed this episode of Hunter S. Thompson, what else might they enjoy from our archives?
Yeah, this just jumped off for me, the Joan Didion episode. I think for a variety of reasons. One, it is a natural pair with this.
Yeah.
I'll also say on a personal level, I really enjoyed that show. I thought that was really pleasant to listen to.
Oh.
And it's higher praise than you might realize because I don't like Joan Didion, her work. I don't mean like I never enjoyed reading her work.
Yeah.
That being said, I enjoyed hearing you guys talk about it to the point that it actually made me go back and like look at some of her work again, pull it off the shelf and reread some of it because your talk about it was more interesting than any experience I'd had with it on my own. So
I love it. All right. Well, thanks. All right. Episode 102, Magical Thinker, Joan Didion. I'm going to pull one that has nothing to do with Hunter S. Thompson at all. Fred Willard, episode 58, Best in Show. He's such a
low-rent dinner party.
At our low-rent dinner party, there's a voice of humor that I think that he is sort of more omnipresent and more legacy and impact than I think people remembered. So episode 58, Best in Show, Fred Willard. Here is a little preview for the next episode of Famous and Gravy. She once said, quote, "It's hard to make anyone understand what it's like to have your name on something, to be given credit for things you haven't done. I've been at meetings where someone turned and thanked me, and I hugged the person and said, 'Don't thank me, thank yourself. You're the one who did it with God's help.'" End quote.
I love the quote, but I have no idea.
Famous and Gravy listeners, we love hearing from you. If you want to reach out with a comment, question, or to participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. In our show notes, we include all kinds of links, including to our website and our social channels. Famous and Gravy is created and co-hosted by Amit Kapoor and me, Michael Osborne. Thank you so much to Dr. Devin Fromm for stepping in this episode. It was produced by Evan Scherer with production assistance by Jacob Weiss. Original music by Kevin Strang. Thanks, and see you next time. Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app. You can listen to more episodes early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey.